The story of pro wrestling is, in essence, a series of scams and random acts of bitter revenge, vengeance, and petty jealousy. Which is where we return to our story following the implosion of Johnny Power's rising fiefdom of pro wrestling, as the NWF would go from one of the biggest independent territories of its era to 3 letters mainstream by Antonio Inoki as he looked to legitimize New Japan Pro Wrestling. But people don't stay away from pro wrestling for too long, and if you think Johnny Powers isn't coming back into this story, well, then you're just wrong. I'm telling you, I'm the writer of the story. He's coming back. Historically speaking, I'm Matt Ryan, and this is the look at the first national pro wrestling promotion that almost made it impossible for WCW and WWE to even exist. That's right, we're going there. By New Year's Day 1975, the NWF had changed hands. Johnny Powers was sans a wrestling company, and Pedro Martinez was out of the game. Or was he? See, by the time the NWF would run its final card inside the Masonic Temple in Cleveland, Ohio, Martinez's son Ron, being a massive college basketball fan, had found himself connected with Eddie Einhorn, the man who had revolutionized the syndication of college basketball, parlaying that into TVS, which would act as a syndicator of various sports. Why am I telling you all this for? Go back to episode 1, listen or watch all of it back, and you'll get all the backstory there. We'll wait. You back? Okay, good. With the connection between Einhorn and Martinez established, both the elder and younger Martinez began to wonder, what if? What if they were able to do the one thing that Barnett, Doyle, Mont, or McMahon never got to do? Go national. Filled with a natural distaste for the NWA following their tomfoolery the 2 decades preceding it, and a partnership with the man who turned Elvin Hayes, Coach Wooden, and the man who would be known as Kareem Abdul-Jabbar into radio and television superstars, there was something there. But what exactly? Do you attempt a national touring company, shoot television, and commit to an insane work schedule? Do you apply a Doyle-Barnett approach where you consolidate one region of the country while establishing a secondary option for the promoters of the future? Or do you find wrestling hotbeds for TV and house shows and then blast the syndication for potential super shows? The first option was the Titan Sports approach, which would lead to the boom-bust structure of the 80s, 90s, 2000s, 10s, and is now slowing down as we've seen the human and financial costs it can lead to. Without a sizable crew and infrastructure, something like this would be impossible, especially for what was being considered an outlaw promotion at the time, due to it operating outside the jurisdiction of the NWA or even partnering with the AWA or WWWF, who all kept to their corners and played nice despite just 13 years or so removed from the WWF and AWA burrowing out of the NWA for World Championship related reasons. Double that with the ambition to run right at the heart of not only the NWA's most valuable markets in North Carolina, Florida, and Georgia, but the company would take a swing at New York City one more time. Now, if you are focusing on fighting such a war on one front, especially with Georgia just rebuilding after the All-South War just a few years prior, and the brewing issues with Thunderbolt Patterson and Jim Wilson looking to run opposition, but to also go after key NWA markets and the WWF after they've spent the last 15 years decimating anyone who even dared looking at Madison Square Garden, let alone booking it. And yet, with TVS's momentum and a marketplace with potential, this is the play they were making. There is, though, a fourth option. We have to go all the way back, or all the way forward in this case, to 1983, and a mulleted wonderkind named Dave Meltzer. By 1983, the wrestling world was nearing the brink of complete street warfare as the NWA's tenuous hold over their promoters was starting to bend at the bow of cable television. With TBS and USA Network already in the mix and syndication playing a role in the growth of both World Class and the WWF, how do you combat or go against this rising tide? National arena shows, That's right, the godfather of Reseda, the king of the star ratings. He was the one who pitched the concept of an arena TV show. Much like the NWO, the idea came from what Japan had already been doing for both New Japan and All Japan, but would highlight the fact that each location came with its unique promotion and talent. Here's exactly how Dave laid it out on the first page of the June 1983 edition of the Wrestling Observer newsletter. And I say June 83 because at the time, Dave was only putting these out once a month. A little over 200 years ago, legend tells us that Ben Franklin said as the Revolutionary War began, "We must hang together because if not, we most surely will hang separately." With all the chaos that is about to ensue, it would be wise if the heads of the various booking offices would keep that statement in mind. Pardon me for tooting the fife, but there undoubtedly were various ego problems between the different states back then, but they still worked together and built a powerful nation. There is little doubt that if promoters worked together, the popularity of pro wrestling would increase by leaps and bounds, but the prospects of this happening are awfully dim. A correct beginning point would be to market a national television show. As pointed out in the past, no matter what type of ratings pro wrestling can achieve, no network is going to touch it. But as we've seen in the past few years, wrestling has already become an enormous hit on cable television. Indeed, at one point, the most watched cable show in the country was the Saturday wrestling program taped in Atlanta. While quote-unquote studio shows may be the correct way to promote the local arena matches, they are not the best way to get ratings. Barring an idea from the Japanese, who have managed to market wrestling to a point where they can charge $25 for ringside tickets and still get nightly sellouts, there are times that you have to let your casual fans see your best product. A correct format would be a weekly 90-minute program shown at the same time. Surely weeknight prime time would be the best time, but a show that I'm about to describe could flourish at any time period where significant amounts of people were able to watch. Each week, go to a different major arena, to be decided upon by a producer who knows the business, and tape the arena show. On occasion, you can even show the card live, although tape delays don't hurt wrestling's ratings because results are unavailable in the newspapers. To protect the live gate, black out the show, say within a 150-mile radius. In the 90 minutes, tape the best 3 to 5 bouts on the card. In between matches, have interviews taped with the wrestlers who will be headlining next week's show in whatever city has the best card. You can even touch upon briefly announcing the matches you'll broadcast in 2 weeks, although the main emphasis of the interviews would be to promote the following week's program. Many promoters, for plenty of reasons, would object to having live cards taped, even if it wouldn't hurt their gate. The way to get around that is for the telecasting cable network, whether it's WTBS, ESPN, USA, or whatever, to actually pay rights fees for the telecast. An extra guaranteed $5,000 into promoters' pockets would change many theories about not showing arena matches on television. The beauty of this setup is threefold. One, many fans who rarely attend the arenas but watch on TV would see how much more exciting main events between the top pros can be. 2, because of paying rights fees, promoters can book 3 or 4 national superstars to augment the local talent in the area, and the superstars in turn would love to attend and increase their national rep and drawing power. And 3, it would showcase each area's stars, making them somewhat familiar to fans, and many of them would, through national exposure and making a big hit, become almost immediate superstars. Creating new superstars is almost the key to making pro wrestling a flourishing business. I have little doubt a show of this kind would, after 6 months, be the most watched non-football athletic event nearly every week that there isn't a Kentucky Derby or a World Series. The multitudes of viewers would create so many new wrestling fans that when a superstar is brought into your local town, his drawing appeal will be far greater. This all sounds great, but there's one catch. It'll never happen. If a cable network wants to show wrestling, there are plenty of promoters who would provide them with studio tapes for free. Cable network executives aren't super wrestling fans like the readers of The Observer. They don't know the difference between promotions, so in their mind, why pay rights fees when you can get what they believe is the same product for free? A good studio show can draw a 6 rating on a Saturday afternoon, better than most network sports events. A show like I described already gets a 20 in Japan. It's unfair because of cultural differences to say the show I propose could do that, but conversely, once the show got its following, it could easily get a 10 to 12 rating consistently. The soap opera nature of wrestling creates more loyal viewers than other sports, so a well-done program like this would consistently increase its numbers. those extra ratings points in the long run would be worth a lot more than any extra money that the rights fees and the travel costs to the cable network could be. Now, before we get back to the story, I want everybody to rewind and re-listen to the last 4 minutes of this show, because Dave got a lot right. He didn't get all of it right. He didn't get the finer details right. But he calls and parks a lot of this that we now know as the modern professional wrestling business. He was wrong about rights fees, though. Took a while. Took maybe 20 or so, maybe 15 years after this. Maybe even 10. Because of WCW and the WWE getting rights for however Bischoff made that deal work with WCW and Turner, and USA and Vince worked out a deal, but it wasn't until 2000 where we saw the true power of rights fees and the cataclysmic effect it had on competition in pro wrestling. But go back and listen to the last 5 minutes of this, and think about how different wrestling would be if that was the model. Now back to our regularly scheduled yelling. Also, shout out to where I found this, or who found it. Between the Sheets, David Bixenspan and Chris Zellner, during their start of their Patreon series, they focused on the national expansion, which is why I'm not gonna do a series about it. Also, it's been done to fucking death. I might take elements of it, but if you are not a patron of theirs, go check them out. I don't know if this is up on their main feed or not. It's like from almost 10 years ago. But the first episode they did on the national expansion with my best friend's math teacher from high school, somehow, Pete Letterberg. So go check that out. Shout out to Chris and Bix, a guy I used to edit as an editor for a website many moons ago. But go check out Between the Sheets and their Patreon, because this is how pro wrestling research continues when you support people who make shit. Einhorn's bread and butter being live television and having TVS as a partner, each show could have been a showcase of not only Einhorn's innovations as a broadcast producer, but also different styles and concepts of wrestling from across the country. Hell, Martinez was responsible for one of the most famous television shows in the golden age of pro wrestling, just 20 or so, even less than that. Utilizing a concept somewhat similar to Dave's idea, but localized in Buffalo, because there were a litany of pro wrestling options across the country to watch on regular TV. Don't believe me? Listen to the other episodes of this fucking podcast. Like, it's a thing. That is a thing. But the wrestling universe had drifted from syndicated pseudo-regional shows and a more hyper-localized programming, especially in the Carolinas, one of the regions the IWA was looking to build off of. Possibly due to the opportunity to take a run at Jim Crockett Promotions, hence wanting to poach their booker, George Scott, who, as we've mentioned earlier in this series, was an expert at developing multiple cards a night across multiple regions of a territory, which is why he ended up being a key part of the WWF's national expansion before he ran afoul of the now late Hulk Hogan. Which is a weird sentence to say and write, because he passed away the day after I'm doing the voiceover work for this, and the day I was writing this, after a self-imposed layoff. I'm happy to be back, by the way. But why go after Crockett in the Carolinas? Aside from the fact that Mid-Atlantic's territory was one of the most popular and populated territories of its era, in 1975, we had what you would call a power vacuum. Just as the development of Scott's one booker, a shitload of city system was hitting its stride, the man tapped by Jim Crockett Sr. to run his business after he died, John Ringley, was riding high. but was also in the midst of a failing marriage with Crockett's daughter Frances, and was collapsing in on itself, mainly due to the pro wrestling business, allegedly. And while Ringley was doing a bang-up job as the man running the territory and had the support of nearly every Crockett lieutenant there was to be found from Norfolk to Orangeburg, Ringley decided it may be best if he moved to Florida and worked for Eddie Graham, according to his conversations with Mike Mooneyham. This would bring the reluctant eldest son of the Crockett clan, Jim Jr., to take the reins of the business side, while his brother David would become a definitive on-camera presence for the next decade and a half. And all the reports were that Jim Jr. decidedly did not want the job. After some failed political ventures and working in other aspects of business, Crockett Jr. would find himself in the big chair after issues with Ringley and his soon-to-be ex-wife were untenable, and his issues with her brother more so, as Ringley claimed to Mike Mooneyham they were like oil and water.
When we were looking for a guy to take over from Weaver and Rip Hawk, and I went to John Ringley and I said, let's get somebody else to book. And we came up with one name. He says, who would you like to book? I said, let's get George Scott.
Johnny Ringley, when he took over, he brought George Scott in as a booker.
Jim Crockett Jr. Was, I'm sure, probably not happy that his father had picked John Ringley to run the business.
I was not shocked, disappointed. I was probably relieved that John should have been selected. Things just didn't work out.
John Ringley got caught with not his finger in the cookie jar, but something else. He wasn't stealing money, but he was not being faithful to Frances. Let's put it that way.
As the story goes, I had another relationship that basically was the cause of breaking up the marriage, and the family united around Frances, and John Ringley was gone, and all of a sudden, by necessity, Jimmy Crockett stepped in, and then that's how that whole thing started to the next phase.
We had been working in the business not all of our lives, but for a long time when my father passed away, and we had already influenced a lot of things that were going on. He had backed off. And all of us had our own forte. Jimmy he's the oldest son. He was going to take over the presidency.
They stepped up and did what they had to keep the business going.
Jimmy was, I guess, who we should have picked, but then, to see him and what he did, with the company after Johnny left was fantastic.
Sensing that Crockett II may not be a wartime boss, along with it being a convenient path to Atlanta, another city and territory that was just coming out of a war between Ann Gunkel, Ray Gunkel's widow, and the NWA's establishment. Not only was that one of the more defining wrestling wars of its era, it is the reason why pro wrestling is as strong of a thing on TBS as it would become, because both sides had TV on WTCG, which was now to be TBS. And yes, this will be our second season, because I really, really want to talk about this. If that was the plan, to go through the Carolinas, get to Georgia, beat out all the competition that were weak or in the midst of a power vacuum, that is a great plan. That is almost the McMahon plan in '84. Especially if these guys did what Vince did and load up the roster with guys that the Crockett fans knew. But they needed to be ready for whatever the hell was coming next, and we will see when this show finally hits television. It was a mixed bag of talent, to be certain. But as we talked about at the top of the show, the South wasn't the only goal or even the primary target. By 1975, Vince McMahon I was sitting pretty as the definitive promoter in the New York territory. And this did not sit well with Pedro Martinez, one would assume. After losing his various battles to maintain control of the Garden and his on-the-record dislike of McMahon's partner, mentor, dare we say father of modern wrestling, Toots Mondt, with the bankroll of TVS, the right star, and the right momentum, he could take the Garden back. And it had been over a decade and an entirely new building 18 blocks away since anyone not named McMahon helmed the show inside the world's most famous arena. But if I had Eddie Einhorn backing me, I'd try to be as ballsy as Pedro was here. Now, as I said at the top of the episode, this may be petty revenge, but this is pro wrestling. And if anything can power a promotion, it is petty revenge. That's the one thing I love about researching this show, is that a national wrestling scene was almost inevitable. No matter what decade we were in, from the advent of the business until it actually happened, we all have these different use cases and applications of the laissez-faire national efforts, such as the Doyle-Barnett partnership, or even the NWA's collection of affiliates acting as a pseudo-nation state that would operate separately, but acting as a unit, especially if one of their fellow promoters were facing competition. You know, like the mob! It is also strange looking at the IWA from the POV we've been developing these many months and realizing that if it worked, nothing we know now would be what it is in pro wrestling. If Einhorn and Martinez were on the money, if they poached Scott and all the talent that came with them on top of the other guys they were looking to poach, it could have created a lot of different scenarios that could have played out very differently. Very, very differently. Option A, the NWA comes in and does what they do in Atlanta. B, Einhorn brings everyone to the table and they work out a deal. C, the NWA and WWWF reaffirm their alignment and McMahon's secret but not so secret involvement in the NWA and snuff him out. And then D, Einhorn uses the business the same way McMahon would do by dividing and conquering just a decade earlier. If it's B, we end up getting the idealized version of what Dave had been talking about 8 years after the IWA was formed. A weekly nationally televised product that would focus on the top stars in the top cities with the top matches, aka the modern American national TV format, kinda. And, well, Einhorn and Martinez would attempt their own version of our final option with traits that the younger McMahon would utilize just 8 years later, with weirdly somewhat similar story a little bit later on how McMahon tried to poach Harley Race before the first Starrcade. Something happened somewhat similar to McMahon's father. We'll get into that a little bit more. But before we wrap this up, it is interesting to meditate on the idea that if Einhorn succeeded, if IWA worked, the last 50 years of pro wrestling would be markedly different. If the IWA were able to, in one swoop, beat McMahon, Crockett, and Barnett in Atlanta, and with the exception of McMahon, there were chances to get him where it hurt the most. What would wrestling look like now? Especially with Einhorn offering guaranteed contracts, better schedules, and bigger exposure. See, Eric just took other... never mind. What is old is new again, my friends. Welcome to the living prototype for the Monday Night War. Next time, we will actually figure out who booked the IWA, how a crybaby tried to steal an animal from the Garden, and how you go from Midtown to Jersey City without losing the crowd. With wrestlers always looking for better paydays and better schedules, as they should, many of the biggest names in wrestling were seeing that, much like the World League, the ABA, and the WHA of the same era, opportunity awaited the ones who were brave enough to make the jump. We set the stage for a war that wasn't a war next time on Historically Speaking. Historically Speaking is a production of Ember Media and a part of the Intergalactic Sports Network. For more information on us, just like and subscribe to either a podcast feed or YouTube channel. You can follow me on Instagram at MattRyanYells. I really don't use any other social media outside of that, so if you want to connect with me, do that here, or we'll probably put an email or something. Drop a comment, leave a review, and we'll see you next time. So good to be back, baby.